Hello, I'm Jay. Welcome to Forbidden Files. Among the cases, there is one type that always scares the shit out of people. Because to some extent, it is beyond the spectator's desire to delve into the tight, bizarre details of unsolved cases, leaving only fear and avoidance. Such cases are serial killings. I'm going to talk about a bizarre serial killing in Canada. Unlike other serial killers, this murderer wrote a movie script and directed the series of murders according to the script. This is the case of script murder in Canada. On October 3, 2008, the sky in Edmonton, Canada, was darkening. The Hagersons, who just had dinner, were walking on the street nearby. Turning into a side street, they found a shadow wriggling on the ground in front of them. The couple stopped and watched from afar. Upon closer inspection, the shadow appeared to be a man. He was struggling to crawl forward. Maybe he was heading for the black pickup not far away. The husband wanted to help him but was stopped by his calm wife, because the latter was frightened by such a scene. But the woman was afraid to shout, for she didn't know why the man was crawling on the ground. Anyway, it's abnormal. Who knew? What did the man do? Besides, the garage behind him was ajar with lights off. What if there's some criminal gang? It could be dangerous to rush in and help. So they quickly ran home and reported to the police. The police arrived quickly after receiving the report, but didn't see the weirdo, the couple said. The garage was tightly closed and there was no black pickup. As if none of this ever happened, the police called back, saying no abnormalities found. It was strange, but since the police said there was nothing wrong, the Hagersons didn't persist. A week passed. On October 10th, Gary Altinger found his brother John Altinger was planning to drive to meet an online friend. John said he got to know a woman he liked on the dating platform Plenty of Fish and was planning to meet her. Gary smiled. His 38 brother, a quality control engineer, was kind and humorous but was poor in handling a relationship. So he tried to find love on many websites. It would be nice if he could really find love this time. However, John never came back. 2 days later, Gary received an email from his brother which read, "I met an extraordinary woman named Jane. She is my true love. We'll be staying in Costa Rica for vacation. I won't be back in town until December 10th. Gary read the email with a furrowed brow. It was the strangest email he'd ever received, because his brother wouldn't talk in such a tone or do such a thing at all. John's friends also thought so. They confirmed to each other whether they had heard from John and called his company. The more they knew, the more strange it was. Gary went to John's apartment and found the room was a mess, but all John's clothes, backpacks, daily necessities, and even his passport were there. He didn't seem to go on a trip. Gary assumed something may be wrong with his brother and called the police immediately. The Edmonton police were busy handling another case. John's was assigned to Bill Clark of the Major Crimes Unit. The first thing Bill did was to locate, through the signal, where the mail was from. It was from a garage in a neighborhood of northeast Edmonton. The owner of the garage, named Mark Twitchell, he said he was an online writer, scriptwriter, and film producer. The garage was rented for photographic equipment. Sometimes it was also used as a studio. Mark said he hadn't been there for weeks. He stressed to the police that the street seemed not peaceful. The lock of his garage had been broken several times, so he was afraid to put valuable equipment inside. There was nothing wrong with Mark's testimony. Bill looked both inside and outside the garage and found nothing strange. After taking a few photos, he left. The veteran detective was troubled by the lack of clues. But according to his experience and intuition, the garage should not be ignored. So he announced the details of the case and the address of the garage to the media so as to get some clues. The Hagersons were surprised by watching the news on TV. because they were impressed by that garage. That's where they saw the strange man. The couple immediately reported the major crimes unit with what they saw that day. But Bill found something wrong when piecing together the details of the case. John met his online friend on October 10th, but the Hagersons saw the man on October 3rd, a week before John's disappearance. Moreover, John's car was a red Mazda rather than a black pickup. Was there more than one victim in this case? According to the Hagersons, the man seemed to be trying to escape, and the police arrived at the scene quickly. So was this man still alive? If he was, he may be able to provide important clues. But Bill was disappointed by the fact the man didn't show up for a long time. There was no news then. What really brought a turning point to the case was another clue. Bill deployed police around the garage day and night. On October 20th, they saw Mark showing up in a red Mazda. A red Mazda? Wasn't it the car John was driving when he disappeared? Due to this, Mark was summoned to the police station again to be interviewed. Mark confessed to Bill he did meet John. John was preparing to leave for Costa Rica, so he bought this Mazda from John for $40. After that, he parked the car at a friend's house. He had only $40 in cash then, so he also wondered why John was willing to sell the car at such a low price. For Bill, his statement was full of loopholes. John disappeared because he was murdered, and it was a lie that he was going to Costa Rica. Other than Gary, who received the email, and others who were looking for John, the only person who knew about Costa Rica in the email was the killer. And a car for $40? Not reasonable at all. Bill assumed Mark as the suspect. As the owner of the garage, he was very likely to be the murderer. But Bill had no evidence to prove Mark was involved. In the following interrogation, Bill needed to make Mark believe that he'd found the clues. He must develop a psychological deterrent to let Mark give himself away. It was a psychological game between the police and criminal. Then Bill and Mark had a friendly chat for 74 minutes. Mark either denied he was involved in the case, or said he knew nothing about it, until Bill slammed the table, saying, "You're going to have a hard time the rest of your life for doing such a thing." Mark replied, "Really? You'll be surprised by my tolerance." Bill was pleased because it revealed Mark planned to stall for time. At least it confirmed his inference that Mark was the suspect. Soon the police found John's blood, and a knife with blood on it from the trunk of the red Mazda. With the evidence, Bill had enough reason to go to the garage and Mark's home and conduct a thorough search. This time, he saw a very different scene. The doors and windows of the garage were sealed with plastic and tape. He found a large console in the garage. Fluorescent tests revealed there had been a lot of blood on the ground. Ammonia and bleach to clean the blood were found along with pipes stained with John's blood. With concrete evidence, Mark Twitchell was formally arrested and accused of first-degree murder on October 31st. To the police's surprise, a laptop was found in Mark's house. That might be the tool Mark used to lure John over by chatting with him online. Account information and chat records had been cleared. The police restored the data and they found some strange files. Mark was an unknown film director and producer. There were a movie script about a serial killer and a document called Confessions of an SK. SK here meant serial killer. The content of this document was similar to the plot of a movie script, but more like an autobiography. It detailed how the protagonist tricked a man online by pretending to be a young woman, but the man escaped. A week later, the protagonist did the same thing to another man. He killed and dismembered the man and burned his body in an iron drum. What wasn't burned completely was thrown down a sewer. To the police's horror, the plot here, including the iron drum where the victim was burned, matched exactly with the evidence found at the garage in this case. Police also found burn marks on a nearby lawn according to the script. So it was reasonable to believe this document is a record of Mark's murder. And Mark directed the series of murders based on that script. And the second unfortunate guy mentioned in the document is the missing John Altinger. So where was the first person mentioned in the document? On November 3rd, after hearing Mark was arrested, the strange person the Hagersons had met finally showed up. He was a programmer named Gilles Tétrault. His experience was very similar to John's. The only difference was the woman named Zena. Gilles merrily walked in the garage after his arrival. He heard footsteps behind and thought it was his beloved Zena. But turning around, he saw a tall man wearing a scary hockey mask. The next moment he was paralyzed by the current from a taser and collapsed. The masked man also aimed his weapon at Gilles' head. The fear of death gave Gilles strength instead. Suddenly, he grasped the weapon with all his might and found it was a model. Feeling hopeful, Gilles approached the garage door as he was beaten. It took all his strength to get out of the garage, but he couldn't stand up because of the violent electric shock. It was at this point that he was seen by the Hagersons, who were taking a walk. The couple didn't step in to help, but they did save Gilles, because Mark saw them approaching and didn't dare to move, which gave Gilles a chance to escape. The case was very clear, only two questions remained. First, where were John's unburned remains? Second, what was Mark's motive for murder? Was it due to psychopathy? Mark refused to tell where the remains were. No matter what Bill asked, Mark just looked out of the window silently. Then in June 2010, Mark seemed ready and asked to meet the police in Edmonton. He could confess to the location, but only if he wouldn't speak to Detective Bill Clark. According to Mark, the police finally found John's remains. As for Mark's motive, Bill drew a conclusion from Mark's ex-wife and his personal belongings. According to his ex-wife, Mark was talented as a screenwriter, but had an unusual interest in being a character. He was a big fan of the American series Dexter. He always felt he shared the instinct to kill others of the main character Dykes, which led him to dream of becoming a serial killer. Mark wrote and directed a thriller named House of Cards, about a man who got to know a beauty online and was killed and dismembered after meeting. Perhaps Mark wanted to show his great work or to fulfill his dream, so he directed the plot of his own script in reality. On April 11, 2011, Mark was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for 25 years. He didn't become a fearsome serial killer. The escaped Gilles later published a novel called The One That Got Away. The book was popular, turning Gilles from a programmer into a best-selling author. Mark later spent a fortune on a TV set in the cell and watched the entire Dexter series. But for John, I wonder what he thought at the last minute. Was it still a fantasy he had before the dating, or the fear of knowing about the killer? Anyway, he became the victim of the script of Mark, the psychopath.